Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. I am so giddy with excitement today that I can't even contain myself. And we're just starting. And it is because, wait till I tell you who is in the leadership studio today. My two sisters are here today. Very excited. They are not only my sisters, they are amazing leaders in their field. But mostly they're here because they're just awesome people, so fun, and have a lot to share with you on this topic that we have today. So I want to introduce you to Diane Cowan and Ingrid Emerick, also known as Big Sis, Little Sis. I won't tell you which is which, but let me give you their just due because they had to send me their bios so that I could make sure that I was talking about them correctly because, you know, if I could write their bios, it'd be a whole different story. But I'll start with Diane's because it's right here in front of me. Diane is the Senior Vice President and Global Transit Director for a Fortune 500 company, AECOM, in their global transportation business line. She served in management, operational project program management, business development for over 29 years. She's had leadership positions at large and small companies, including being the youngest principal shareholder and board director at a woman-owned company. Yay, woohoo! She currently supports the executive leadership team of AECOM, driving transformation through strategy and growth, and lots of wonderful other things about her, but you'll get some of that as we go, so I don't want to give it all away. And then you have Ingrid over here, Ingrid Emerick, who is the president of Girl Friday Productions, which she co-founded. She has been in book publishing for more than 30 years. She began her career at Seal Press, which is now an imprint of Hachette. And during her 12 years there, had a range of positions, including publicity director, marketing, sales director, rights director, senior editor, editorial director, and associate publisher. She founded Girl Friday Productions with her colleague in 2006. And now they have produced more than 500 books a year. Is that possible? 500 books a year for a wide range of clients. And she's also an award-winning instructor for the University of Washington in their certificate and editing, and has led workshops in editing and writing for numbers of organizations. She has edited dozens of published books in many, many genres. So I'm very excited to have both of these awesome women who happened to be related to me in the studio today to talk about storytelling and how powerful storytelling can be in your business, because they're also really good storytellers in real life. And we as a family often tell stories, and anytime there's a moment to sit around with a couple of glasses of wine, generally stories and laughter and tears ensue somehow in the process. And so I know that they also use the power of story in their work. So welcome, ladies.
So excited to be here. Thank you for honoring us by having us on your amazing podcast that we listen to religiously.
Absolutely.
I'm going to test you later. But anyway, we've got all the curls and all the girls and the curls in the house today. So let's jump in. Diane, I'll start with you. How did you first come to realize kind of the power of storytelling in your field of work?
You know, I think that's a really good question, because when not everyone thinks about their work as being a place where storytelling is part of it. But the reality is communication is storytelling, right? So at AECOM, we're a large infrastructure firm that builds infrastructure across the globe. And so when I was a baby planner of infrastructure in Dallas, Texas, I was working on one of my first rail projects, so passenger rail projects, for this really dynamic and engaging planning manager. And we had a meeting, which is very typical, with like local politicians, with citizens, advocacy groups, and some community folks to talk about this idea of a concept of a rail project connecting the Fort Worth Medical Center to the city of Fort Worth to DFW Airport by rail. And rail projects are, of course, I'm a total rail geek. So rail projects to me and to most people are tremendous public service. They have significant benefits to the economy, to the environment, to community placemaking, et cetera. But any new infrastructure project is usually faced with opposition, right? Since it costs money and change makes people nervous. I mean, that's what it boils down to. So being able to like effectively communicate the why and create a vision through story is so key in infrastructure projects throughout the process, but especially at the beginning when you're planning them. So I was, back to the story. So I was signing people in for this meeting because you want to have record. And I'm just listening to them all grumble to each other about like, what a waste of time this is. Why are they there? Like, what are they doing? This is going to be a waste of money, you know, all of that. And so I started getting like super nervous and concerned, even though I wasn't speaking for my boss, right? And I'm like, how is he going to do this? This is horrible. Why are we doing this project? I just went down the spiral, right? And so everybody settles into their seats. They're all still kind of grumbly talking to each other. And my manager at the time essentially went over and flipped the lights off. And it like made everybody, of course, be a little stunned and quiet. The, you know, projector came up and there's this beautiful picture of a child in the sun with a big smile. And everybody just kind of like their faces kind of changed at that moment. And then he started saying, this is why we're building this rail project and why it's so important. And then he took us through the story of this girl's life and how rail affected everything in it. Everything from her dad being able to access a new job, from her being able to get to her asthma treatments weekly at the medical center, for her being able to reach university at the Texas Central University, for her being able to go to the airport to go see her grandmother or to get her new job. Like he took it through this whole thing and it changed the entire tenor of the conversation. And so when we broke and started talking to people one-on-one, they started talking about how they would potentially use this. And so that to me was like the quintessential time when I said, I want to be just like him. I want to be able to tell a story and change people's minds.
Are you crying already, Diane?
I am.
Oh my God. We are literally 30 seconds in. Didn't know it would be that fast.
I told you I am a major rail geek, and that was a huge moment for me.
Wow. And you're the toughest of us. You know, it's so true. You know, I forgot to give this little statistic that I love to say all the time, but you just demonstrated it with your story in that, you know, I took a class at Stanford Business School. I took a course in storytelling from Jennifer Aker, and she used to say that story is 22 times more powerful than data alone. And it doesn't mean you don't share the data. You just don't share it first. And what he did was not start off with the data on why this was important to change their minds, because in order to change their minds, he had to start with story, or it made it a lot easier. And then he could follow up with, and I'm sure he did, or, you know, you guys did in terms of the data, because our minds process stories, not logic, right? Our minds are just, we are built for story and how things work, why things work. It goes back to like caveman and woman times around the fire. It's the first way we communicated. So I love that. I love that he turned the lights off too. And I love that you used the term projector. Was it a real projector or was it like on the screen? How old are you? Anyway, thank you for that story. What about you, Ingrid? What do you?
Yeah, I love that story, Diane. And, you know, I think like sort of alluding to what you said too, Christine, like we are storytelling creatures, not just the three of us. Humans. And as such, that is the way that we connect with each other. It's the way we find and make meaning out of our lives. It's the way we feel support and growth. And so obviously storytelling is just like central to everything about humans. And the reason I got into book publishing was because I was a huge reader and I loved story. It was where as a kid I would escape to, you know, and I would go into a different world and I would learn so much from the characters without having to go through necessarily all the trials and tribulations of those characters. And so obviously in my profession, in my industry as a book publisher and a book producer, we're all about storytelling. That is what we do. And we help people tell their stories. In our case, it's through the written word, through the book, which I think is, and I believe most people think, even though we always hear these dreadful statistics, again, data on the number of readers in the world, et cetera. Books are really kind of the most fleshed out idea, right? And so everything kind of comes and cascades down from a book, but a book is an opportunity for a writer to share whatever they're going to share, their story, their interests, you know, whatever, and to do it in a very thorough way. So it's been kind of interesting because book publishing is a very antiquated business. It's not at all high tech. It's gotten a little bit more high tech in the last 10 years. But honestly, before about 10 years ago, it was probably the same business it was 100 years ago. Like it had not really changed. And what happened about 10 to 15 years ago was we got a lot of technology that allowed for distribution to happen in a different way. It allowed for printing to happen in a different way, ebooks, other book formats, audiobooks all rose up. So with all of that, there was this opportunity, and we were part of this as well, but for publishing to kind of break open and democratize. So an industry that had purposefully been very opaque suddenly was forced with having to be far more transparent, representative, and ultimately democratized, or their model was not going to work. And so that's what you've seen happen if you've been following publishing over the last 10 or 15 years, and especially even the last couple of years. A lot of mergers and acquisitions, a lot of big players shifting around, lots and lots of self-publishing happening, lots of authors being able to directly connect with their readers. And so the whole gatekeeping model of like kind of deciding whose story should be told based on a whole whole bunch of factors, that's just not working anymore, because the whole in this era of person-to-person communication on a mass level, like through social media, it just doesn't work, right? People want to be able to directly hear from like all kinds of people and their stories. And so I think it's really exciting, because I think what we're seeing is far more people from many different backgrounds telling those stories, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah. So true. And, when you guys think about it, like, where do you see throughout your businesses? I mean, obviously, Ingrid, yours is so clear. Like, you're in the business of storytelling, right? And what I know about you is that you can almost never let a moment go without a story, that you have for it. I mean, I can, in my mind, when I think about it, I can laugh at a million stories that you've told me in the past, But for both of you, like, can you think of the areas of your work where you use story outside of the most obvious? Do you know what I mean? Like, Diane, you gave one that was great too, in terms of, trying to, win over constituents, I guess. But what are some other areas that you use story? Because I think sometimes people just think that it's related to sales, right? Certainly that's a big one, but what else is there?
Well, as a planner and implementer of major infrastructure, it's really all about storytelling as a planner. The engineers probably would not say that, but the planners.
Let's hope not.
The architects would be with me on the planning side of this, but for us, the storytelling a lot of times the story's been told when we go to a community, right? And we have to first understand, what should be built to support and benefit that community to build a sustainable legacy. We have to understand the story of that community and the ground that will hold that infrastructure. So what's the history of it? Was there First Nations there? How can we recognize and revere that in the infrastructure? Was there a historical event there? How do we bring that story to life with the infrastructure, or the way that people interact with the infrastructure? Culturally, was it important for particular communities, whether it's of color or of nationality, and so being able to kind of bring that to it as well, and making sure that we're revering that as we build infrastructure and we help support that and highlight it, is really key. So we have to really hear this and research this to come up with the best way to honor the story of the place. And then, of course, once we develop the infrastructure solution in combination with the community, we do have to sell it. So that's where being able to bring people along, whether it's, people who are having to be directly impacted by it, and maybe their home is being taken or some of their property is being taken, whether it's funding agencies, that's a big part of the sell, right? Is to be able to get federal or state funds to help support an infrastructure project, or maybe a tax has to be levied on the citizens. And so you have to be able to explain the good of this infrastructure so that people vote on it. So that's kind of the indirect and the direct way I see storytelling in the infrastructure field.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. It's kind of like the idea of before the impetus, before you even create your story, is listening to the story that's already on that ground, so to speak, in that community. I love that, because good stories really come from also being really good observer and witness and listener to others, right?
That's a great point. That's a really great point.
So Ingrid, what about you? Where do you see opportunities all the time within your field of work or at your office or?
Yeah. So, I mean, thinking about it outside of the obvious, where we are producing stories all the time, kind of ironically, maybe while we're kind of experts at helping individuals tell their stories, telling our own story has been a more slowly evolving process. And, as editors, by most of us, who's at the company, started as editors and still are editors to some degree. As a profession, editors are supposed to be in the shadows, right? They're behind the writer. They're not supposed to take any credit. And that's just kind of been the way that profession has evolved and the standard of it. So it's been a little less comfortable, I would say, for us. And I would also say it's a weakness for us as a company. We have this amazing woman-founded company. We have incredible work we've put out, incredible relationships with our clients, people who come back to us again and again and again. And, we're almost 20 years old. And we don't tell many people about that. And so that has been something that we've really worked on, trying to get that story out there, and not only for sales, but honestly, as it's kind of interesting because, of course, initially you think, oh, we're going to tell our story and hopefully people connect with that. And that does happen, right? We tell our story, we use our website, we use podcasts, we use different things like that, magazine articles, etc. And we do have authors that connect with us because when it comes right down to it, to your point before, people are emotion driven. Putting a book out is an emotional process. It's not something, it's making a dream come true. And it's maybe their legacy. Maybe it's their art that they've been, scribbling away for 15 years and never showing anyone. So the whole thing is quite emotional. And so what we find is most writers want to work with people who they connect with. And the best way for people to understand that is for you to put your story out there and have the people come to you that resonate with that story. And so we've started doing that. And what we found is that more people come to us, but more than that, people who connect with us and we connect with come to us now more. So it's sort of a self-selecting process, which has been really, really good and interesting. The other bit too is obviously for our team. And that's a story that we don't have a small staff. We are not like AECOM. We're a small company, 25 people. We work with probably 200 contractors on kind of a regular basis that are part of our extended team. But our small group, we have had to, really help them understand who we are. And as new people come on board, tell the story of Girl Friday, because we're kind of a special company. And that really connects with them, and people stay. They just stay for a really long time, even though the money isn't great and the work's hard and, all of that. I think it provides kind of like a connection to something bigger that people really crave in their work now. I don't think we've been very great at it, and I think we're trying to get better.
Yeah.
And we're sort of modest. And so that doesn't always work so well for us. Yeah.
Yeah, so. It's true. It's so true that it gets in our way sometimes as well. In the past, we're trying to just keep putting it out there. That's a great challenge. I mean, Diane, do you see other kind of common challenges that you've seen to you incorporating story in your work?
Just kind of playing off what Ingrid said and your recognition that that's true for you as well at your company. I think when we drill it down to a basis too, I think unfortunately with women in business as well, we bring some modesty to it that sometimes our counterparts don't, right? And so that's something that I'm always, as I mentor individuals within our company or outside of our company, if they're women or if they're newer career individuals, that's something I'm always bringing up, is the fact that it's good to listen and to understand and to be modest, but it's also important to know when you need to speak up, when you need to be heard, and you need to demand something that's fair for you, right? And that's good for the company as well. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make that point because I think it's an important one that you guys touched on. So another way, besides that kind of storytelling, I guess, that people can do on their own behalf, sometimes with stories, there can be some pitfalls, right? Of course, because sometimes depending on the individual, you might not be considering the audience. And I see that happening more and more these days as people are embracing their authenticity, which I love. Let me be clear. But I think it's also important to understand we're working in multi-generational teams. Oftentimes we're working in the instance of AECOM, we're working global. So we work across different cultures and nationalities. And so that can bring, different ideas in. People have different communications and methods of communications. They have different values that they bring to the table as they listen or hear or tell a story. And they also have just a different experience of the world, right? And they might have a different culture, customs, all those types of things. What's offensive, what's not offensive. So it's an interesting mix. It gets more complicated the more global in general we become, right?
Right. People say reading the room, but the room can be quite large in a global setting that you're in. Yeah.
It absolutely can be. So I think for a global company, I think part of it is really the company setting a very strong culture. And luckily at AECOM, we've done that with a really big emphasis on diversity. The value of that, ethics and acceptance are really key. I think also very importantly, from the leadership side of the company, being able to show the importance of being authentic to yourself at the same time as being respectful to the diverse workforce and the diverse people that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
I love it.
From a very more direct tactical approach, I guess I'd say, if we're kind of mobilizing someone to a different country, we go through awareness training with them so that they can understand the language, potentially, the customs, the communication styles of their destination. And then for me personally, I see this tension around stories often, again, from a multi-generational typically is what I'm seeing. And so I try to coach the earlier career, the more seasoned professional, whichever it may be, to really consider more the ears that are hearing the words than the mouth that is saying the words.
I love it. Ears. That's
speak with your ears. So
speak with your ears. Yes.
So I think that's the big thing that I try and.
I love it. Well, that brings us to our little final segment of this is that we're going to do a quick round robin of some tips that people can. I know I'm throwing you for a loop here, Dee, but you just gave the first one, so you get a break for a minute. And I'll do one after so that Ingrid has a minute to think. But just some quick tips that people can think about when incorporating story. So one that I will say is to remember to push yourself to be a little bit vulnerable in a story. You're not always the hero of your own story, but maybe you become the hero after something that's hard or something that's vulnerable, because I think then other people can relate to you a little more. So I try to push myself to think, wait, how can I not tell a story where I'm just come off as like awesome from the start? That's very hard for me. I'm kidding. All right, Ingrid, what about you? Do you have one?
Yeah, I would say for us, what would be a good tip? Probably let other people tell your story sometimes too. We started doing a kind of questionnaire after we would finish work with people and get feedback from them probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I love reading those. They're so interesting because what we think we're good at is oftentimes the same and sometimes totally different. And what we failed at, or hopefully not very often, I love hearing that too. So it's places for improvement. But I really think that we have authors that are just really happy to do testimonials for us and give that kind of word of mouth, because that is what an author thinking about working with us wants to hear. They don't really want to hear from us. They want to hear from our other authors. Like, how was it working with them? And obviously that is what we all have become used to in this day of Yelp and TripAdvisor and Amazon reviews and everything is like, let's hear what other people have to say. So
I love that. That's a great one. Great tip. Diane, you got one?
Yeah, I'll switch a little and be really specifically tactical. So when you're on a video meeting or you're making a presentation over video, I think it's very important that you're not reading your notes and that you're not looking down, in that instance that you're looking at the camera as much as you can. And if you're doing this presentation in a group of people, then make sure that you're intently listening as the other person is speaking and look interested. And smile.
Smile, right? All right, great. I'll have my next one is try to practice your story ahead of time, preferably for somebody, so that you're not saying it for the first time in an important high stakes situation, and try to get it down to about 3 minutes. Unless you're doing what Diane said, where you're weaving it throughout your presentation, like the guy did with that, kid looking up at the sun, right? But you want to get a 3-minute story. Sometimes I'll hear a story that will go on, and I'm a culprit of this, 20 minutes, and it could really be honed down and then maybe told a little bit throughout. But people are going to, for business anyway, want to hear a shortened version of that story usually to begin with. Depending on, that's my Ingrid, you got another one?
Well, this kind of comes from my work as an instructor, is remember that people have different learning styles. And so when you're telling a story, tell them in different ways. So some people, it is reading material. Other people, it's visual, video. Other people, it's auditory, podcasts, things like that. Some people want interactive, they really need to interact with the material, interact with you. And so we, of course, as editors, were super stuck for years in just putting out volumes of written word until, some very smart people reminded us that not everybody wants to read that much. And actually, even when they're talking about books. And so we started going and doing many more videos and podcasts and YouTube things. And so that just made a big difference in the way that we told story.
Love it. All right, Diane, one more.
Okay. I agree completely with the practicing in front of someone. I often practice in front of my dogs, see how interested I can keep them, which sounds sad, but true. I think the other thing that I would say is that if you are going to be speaking in public in front of a big room, try as best as you can to reenact the position that you're going to be in. So in other words, if you're standing to present, then stand to practice. If you're going to be in a large room where perhaps the materials that you're speaking to are not going to be in front of you, then you need to try and memorize as much as you can, but be able to still have it within don't memorize too much line by line, because you want to be able to put in your personality, which I think is another thing that's very engaging for people, is to make sure that you put your personality in. Don't try to formalize yourself if you're not a formal person. Don't try to be casual if you are a formal person, because it comes off odd.
Yeah, it's authenticity, right? People pick up on authenticity and truthfulness. Don't make up a story that's not true. I've seen people do that before, and it's so easily, you can read it. The other thing that I'm trying to get better at, so I'm working on it right now, is the use of music. Ingrid, I saw somebody speak recently who was telling a story, and he put up a slide, not of data, but just of image, right? Just like you said, Diane, from your projector, an image went up on the screen, but also he had music pumping through, and music, it makes us so emotional. It immediately connects us to something. And I thought, I need to get better at that. So I'm going to try incorporating music and some powerful photos in the back of my self. I think you're right. The people need whatever mediums you can possibly give them. All right. Well, thank you, ladies, for joining me today. We're out of time, but it was so fun to have you here. And I look forward to having you back again soon for another topic. So thanks.
Thank you, Sissy.
Yeah, thanks, sis. It was a lot of fun. And
it was a lot of fun.
I'm the youngest.
It was.
You had to do that. Okay. Well, I'm the one without a filter. So let's say that. In all ways
without a filter. Ingrid is the oldest, but raised as the youngest. So let's just let that sit there. Guys, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.